Hi, I'm Finn, Reverse Components Product Manager, and today I'm going to show you how to set up your chain tensioner and make sure it's absolutely dialed. This is all the kit that you'll need to set your bike up as a single speed. Of course, here we have our chain tensioner and the single speed kits. Single speed kits for Shimano come in microspline and HG variations, and for SRAM we have an XD kit. If you have an XD R3 hub, then we offer spacers that you can put behind the kit to keep the chain line in the correct position. As for chains, the compatible options are a Z1 Narrow chain, a 9-speed, 10-speed, 11 and a 12-speed chain. Here we have a 12-speed chain, which would be the lightest option available, but a Z1 Narrow will be the strongest and most reliable option that you could take. As for tools, you just need a 6mm Allen key. We recommend a torque wrench. Of course, you need your cassette tool to put the single speed kit on, and depending on what type of chain you're using, either a split link tool or a normal chain tool to fit the chain. This is a 17-tooth sprocket and single speed kit on an HG 3-hub driver. 17-tooth sprocket is the largest one that is compatible with our chain tensioner, but a 13 and a 14-tooth will give you the standard gear ratio you'd expect for a park or a downhill bike. First things first, install the correct single speed kit for your 3-hub body and put the wheel back in the bike, and then we're ready to get cracking with the chain tensioner. And before we install our chain tensioner, it is important to note these washers here. These will help you set the correct chain line depending on what bike the tensioner is being fitted to. And if I installed this chain tensioner with all of the washers in place, you'd see that wouldn't create the correct chain line, as the cog and the sprocket don't line up. These washers create 4mm of adjustment, and in this case I need to remove all 4 of the available washers, and refitting it like this will create the correct chain line. And see, when I wind this in, that will create the correct chain line, as the cog and the sprocket are now lining up perfectly. But it's important to note that one washer needs to remain in place to prevent any binding. And to make the tensioner work super smooth, it's very important to set the correct clearance between the sprocket and the pulley. The acceptable margin is between 1 and 3mm of clearance. Once you have set this, you torque up the tensioner to 28 Nm of force, and it is locked in place. Please ensure that when the chain tensioner is in its resting position, the cage is not in contact with the limit stopper. If this is the case, the chain's no longer under tension and you'll get lots of slap, and equally when the suspension tops out, you can damage the limit stopper. The way to make sure that your chain doesn't get too tight under full compression of the suspension is very simple. If you have an air shock, simply let the pressure out of the shock, push the suspension through its travel, and make sure that this isn't under full stretch. If you have a coil shock, just unbolt the shock at either end depending on which one has the easiest access, and let the bike sit into its travel, and you'll be able to check the same thing. I've let all the air out of the shock, and under full compression I can already tell that this chain is too long. In this state we're likely to get quite a lot of chain slap, so I would remove some links. And the opposite problem would be if the chain was too short, you would see the tensioner being pulled all the way around like this, and then you'd be at danger of damaging the chain or the tensioner when the bike is under full compression. So to rectify this, I'm going to remove some links out of this chain and test the problem again. And if you're at the other end of the spectrum and the chain is too tight, just simply add some more links and repeat the test. And this is what the chain tensioner would look like when the chain is too short. You can see at this point the chain is totally stretched and the tensioner is at a horizontal axis to the chain stays. If this is the case, it's going to be inhibiting the suspension travel significantly. And with the correct length chain, you should see it somewhere in this range, where it's not overextended under full compression. And now to run through the 2 troubleshooting problems that we normally see. Firstly, is chain slip. If you're experiencing any slip under power when you're pedaling, the most common reason for this is going to be that the chain is too long. But the second most common reason for this is if you don't have enough chain wrap because the tensioner is mounted too far down. There's not enough chain wrap around the cog because the gap between the cog and the pulley is far too big. So please ensure that when it's mounted, there is the 1 to 3mm gap between those two. And then you'll have lots of chain wrap and there's no ability to slip. When it's mounted like this, you should see a lovely S shape over the cog and through the tensioner. And the other troubleshooting issue is if the tensioner is slipping, this is almost always due to the torque on this bolt, so please ensure that that is pushed all the way up to the 28 Newton meters. So please ignore the Allen key, but this is what you would likely see. And the tensioner slipping round too far. The vast majority of the time, this is just due to the torque on this bolt, so please ensure that it is spec'd correctly to 28 Newton meters. But in some cases, particularly with high pivot bikes with a lot of chain stretch, it might be due to the chain being slightly too short when the bike's under full compression. To give you a summary and make sure that the tensioner is set up perfectly, there are 3 important points. Number 1, please ensure that there is only a 1 to 3 millimeter gap between the pulley and the sprocket. Number 2, please ensure that there is a 10 millimeter gap between the cage and the bump stop on the tensioner. And number 3, please ensure that the mounting bolt is fixed at the correct 28 Newton meters of torque. If you have any other questions, please let us know in the comments and we'd be more than happy to answer them. Thanks very much guys, and happy shredding.